We're here to talk about how worship changes everything. So here's what us speakers, we call it the opening statement, the grabber. See if this grabs you. Worship changes everything. But you know what? Worship does not change everything. Now, right now, you're thinking either one of three things. Either number one, you're a hypocrite. Number two, you're crazy. But we've got Ken Honeycutt here, who's the best psychotherapist this side of Charlotte, and surely she wouldn't have booked a loony guy. So either you're a hypocrite, you're crazy, or there's a method to your madness. Let's hope it's number three, right? And you know, it's easy to see. You say two totally different, contrasting, polarizing statements, and you're wondering, how can such two contradicting statements also be completely true at the same time? We got to make sense of it. And so how do we make sense of this? Well, it's kind of like Scripture. If you really want to know what it's saying, sometimes you got to really dig into the meat of it and find the proper context. You know what I'm saying? So we're going to talk about tonight. First, I'll talk about actually how worship does not change everything. And then I'm going to proceed to talk about how worship changes everything. But from both statements, I am going to take you into the proper context of the word everything. Because you see, that's where the great divide is between both statements. And you might be asking, well, this sounds a little too complicated. You know, my faith is very simple. I don't need all this complex, weird kind of theology, if that's what you're bringing here today, and that's not at all what I'm bringing here today. And so then, knowing that, you may be asking, well, then what's the benefit? Well, the benefit is tremendous. I would say actually priceless, because by going into the context of both of those statements, digging up the word everything and talking about what everything is, I believe by having this understanding, it's not only going to affect your worship, but I think it's going to reach down to the core and affect the very heart of your worship. But worship doesn't change everything. That's where we're going to start. And by the way, I'm really wrestling here with I brought notes, and, honestly, I've been doing this like 14 some years, and I think this might be the third or fourth time I've ever carried notes with me. So I've got this little pride battle, just so you know, going on. I think we can be open here. I feel weird about the notes, but this is a huge month for me. Kim, as you already know, and some of you here might already know if you follow me, Facebook and Instagram, and had several speaking engagements and concerts, and we've got this huge album release. This is actually my 10th album, by the way. This is a huge project. I've been doing this a long time, and it means a lot. And so we've got a huge production that's going behind it. And so it's been very difficult in all the busyness and even with as much notice as I was given for this. I did start planning this speech a long time ago, and I've been kind of mulling over it as the weeks have gone on. But here in the past few days, as I've really been zoning in on it, the Lord has just given me so many wonderful nuggets, and I don't want you to miss out on that. For the sake of how busy I've been, I don't want to cheapen the experience for you. I think the Lord has got a lot to say about this subject. And I know I'm here to talk about how worship has really changed my life, and that's where we're going to get to, just so you know. I'm headed in a direction here. And by the way, let me preface another thing before I start telling you how worship doesn't change everything. I want to preface it with this. I am not negating anything you've already heard tonight. We've already had two wonderful speakers come up here, and even Kim had some stuff to add to that. And the stories that have been told tonight are genuine and authentic. And I think when I get into what I'm going to start saying here, it's very easy for you to hear or misinterpret what I'm saying and think that maybe I'm forming rebuttals to things and stories you've heard tonight, and I'm not. Actually, I'm adding to it. I have been very inspired by the stories we've heard tonight. I completely approve of those stories, and I've been impacted in such a way that I'm probably going to remember them for the rest of my life. So please know, I'm only taking what we've already heard and I'm deepening it. We're digging into this a little bit tonight. But if the word everything, when I say worship doesn't change everything, if we're saying the word everything, if that means everything that you think should change, or if everything means everything that should change according to your will or your plans for your life, well, then I stand 100% behind my statement that worship does not change everything. Let me just give you a few examples. Let's talk about the lady who has been struggling with a chronic illness for several years now, and she's tired of it. And you know what? She was at a weekend retreat up in the mountains at a powerful conference over the weekend, and she heard a speaker up there give this wonderful testimony, this story about how through worship, her whole situation changed, and the Lord did this great work. So this lady heard this other lady talking about this at this conference, and so she comes back home thinking, well, wow, okay, so if I start worshiping God, maybe this whole situation with this illness I've been dealing with will change. Maybe God will lift it and take it from me, and maybe everything will be great. And I think that the story at the worship conference, by the way, just like tonight, was probably a very genuine and authentic story, because God does change things. Worship does change things, but we're going to get to that. But this lady thinking that automatically if she starts worshiping God, then her story is going to be just like that story, and that's not necessarily true. Bear with me. Let's think about the man who's been on the unemployment line for 6 months now. He can't get a job, or he hasn't been able to get a job, we'll say. And his wife is working. She's running ragged. And the bills are starting to come in and pile up, and their lifestyle has been set around 2 incomes. So this isn't working out. It's not going to work out much longer. And he just heard his pastor talk this past Sunday about how worship changes everything, and bearing witness and giving testimony to that. And so now he's thinking to himself, wow, well, if I just come home and worship God, I'll get a job. Or maybe my job situation will change. Or better yet, maybe I'll get the job that I've always wanted. And that's not necessarily true. I'm not trying to be a Debbie Downer here. I need you to bear with me, because what I'm doing here is I'm taking you around a path. And sometimes when I speak, I take people on a journey where the scenery might not look so good, but it's not about what you're seeing. It's what you see when you get there to the destination. So I'm taking you there. Hold on, all right? Let's talk about the 17-year-old college or high school basketball player. He's been playing ball his whole life. He's got dreams and ambitions and goals of playing for a college and then moving on to playing in the NBA hopefully one day. And here he is. He's put out applications to all these schools, and he's not getting one single response. He's getting responses to schools he can go to, but nobody's trying to give him a basketball scholarship, a full ride. Nobody's trying to recruit him for their team. And no scouts are looking at him. Maybe a couple have come through town, but I just kind of yawned them off and went on to the next town. And so he's at a Wednesday night youth service, and the youth pastor was playing a video about how worship changes everything. And so he's coming home now, and he's like, well, then I just got to get into some worship. I got to get in some worship. You know what? I'm even going to give my mama my cell phone after dinner, and I'm going to go upstairs and just listen to worship music for a whole hour, get before the presence of the Lord. You know what? I'm going to take it a step further, because worship isn't just what you do with your lips. It's what you do with your actions. So on Saturday, I'm going to get with our church's homeless ministry team, and I'm going to go out and serve the community and make a sacrifice of worship. And maybe then some scouts will look at me, and I'll get a full ride. And that's not necessarily true. It's just not. What do all these stories have in common? All these stories have, I want to be healed. I'm sick of this illness. If I worship God, maybe He'll heal me. Maybe my life will change. Maybe things will be different for me, better for me. If I worship God, maybe I'll get a job. My wife will see me as a man again, and I can, or maybe if I worship God, I'll be accepted to this college, and I can get in. And what are we talking about here? It all comes back to who? I thought worship was supposed to be about Him. Now, mind you, hey, listen. This is a human element that we've got playing out here. This is our human nature. I'm just as guilty. I run to God often more for his hand rather than his heart. I run to God often for what he can give me, for what I can get from him, rather than what I can give to him for what he's already done for me, because what he's already done for us is far greater than we ever deserved. But we're his precious creation, and let me just say, let me add this here for a minute too. God knows we're wired this way. See, the problem is not, and what I'm saying, I said there's something wrong here, right? I'm not saying what is wrong, that there's anything wrong with you coming to the Lord like that. You know, God uses hard situations in our life to draw us to him. He uses the struggles, and when we're in our weakest moments, and that's a demonstration of our faith. That's who we are. That's why we're believers. That's what makes us believers, because we go to him. We look to him for healing and for change and for better situation and blessing and provision. We do go to him, and he knows that that's how we're going to run to him a lot of times. So there's nothing wrong with that. But when you're getting into that place of worship over and over and over again with the Lord, when you are in that place, and this is true, genuine worship that becomes about him and more about him, but you're still focused on me, focused on yourself, that's where the problem lies. Bear with me. The woman with the rare illness. This is going to rub some of you the wrong way, but did you ever consider, what if God wants to use that? What if God has been using that? I've been doing this, like I said, like 13, 14, almost 15 years. I've traveled. I've been to a lot of places. I've done several hundred events. I've been to churches, outreaches, camps, retreats, festivals, block parties, prisons. I have been to youth conferences and met so many people over the years and have heard so many stories. The faces, they blur together, but every now and then some of them stand out. And there's one story in particular that stands out to me about someone that I met, and this person had dealt with an infirmity their entire life, just about, from about as far back as they could remember. And they went through all the motions, going to the faith healing conferences. Everybody at their church was every other Sunday rallying around them and praying over them and laying hands on them. And you could not have had more of a demonstration of faith year after year after year, trying to rid this infirmity from themselves and asking God to take it away and asking God to make this change in their life. And he never took it away. But when I met this person, by the time I met this person, and this person is telling me the story, and they said at this point in time, they said, I stopped asking about 10 years ago. They said, I love the Lord, and I know that the Lord loves me, and I know he cares for me deeply. And I have made peace with the Lord, and I have told the Lord genuinely and sincerely, if ever you are ready to do this, just do it. I will receive that gift anytime you want to give it to me, Lord. They said, but you know what? I don't even care anymore. And it wasn't like a beaten down, downtrodden, like, oh, I don't care, I'm just over it, No, it was like this person had true, genuine peace. Peace. And not only that, but this person proceeded to tell me all the amazing stories and testimonies of how God has used them and their infirmity to impact the lives of other people around them. And if you heard some of the stories, and we obviously don't have time to go into these kinds of details, but some of the stories and some of the ways that this person guided me through their life and all these wonderful, amazing things that happened because of their infirmity and how it affected people around them. God was using them to demonstrate his strength and their weakness. With the unemployment, with the example I gave you about the unemployment, okay? You might say to yourself, come on now, Matthew, look, this guy, he wants a job. What's wrong with that? He wants a job. And you know what? The Bible tells us that work is a good thing. And the Lord wants men to, make provision or make provision through the man. And, you can tell me all these things and say, Matt, why are you saying that God does? Are you saying God doesn't care about that? No. But you know what? I didn't tell you the whole story. You're just assuming that there's this poor guy on the unemployment line who's been on the unemployment line for 6 months and hadn't been able to do anything about it. Number one, you don't know why he doesn't have a job. I never told you that. You don't know what happened at his other job and why he's not there anymore. I didn't tell you that. And you know what? I also didn't tell you that the guy only puts out maybe 1 or 2 resumes a week, and the rest of the time he spends watching Netflix and flipping through his phone, eating potato chips while his wife's at work all day. You know what? His situation doesn't need to change. And I don't care how many times he goes home and takes an hour break from Netflix to go worship the Lord. It's not his situation that needs to change. It's him. He needs to change. You see where the lines can get crossed? And how about the 17-year-old aspiring college ball player? He's been playing his whole life. Come on, Matthew, you can't tell me that God doesn't want to bless this man's gift. Let me first put something in perspective here. Do you know how many millions of high school basketball players there are and how much of a small percentage of those actually make it to college? And do you know how many of those guys are probably praying people? Number two, do you know that once those few percentage get into college ball, do you know how many of those college players actually get to go on into the NBA? We're talking, you've got to win the lottery. You've got to win the lottery. That's basically what it is. And I'm not saying that God doesn't do it for people. Listen, all of these stories that I'm telling you, I am not saying that God does not do these things for people. Do not misread or misinterpret what I am saying. We have an amazing God, and He cares about us. He cares about our illnesses. He cares about our unemployment and our bad situations, and He cares about our hopes and dreams and what we aspire to be. He cares about it, and He wants to hear about it. But did this young high school basketball player ever consider the fact that maybe the Lord is done with that season in his life and that the Lord has a whole nother thing He wants him to get into? Can he get out of the way of all of his hopes and dreams, being so focused on his hopes, his dreams, of what he wants, what he thinks he should do, to just stop for a minute and get into real deep worship, because this is what real, true worship will do, and just open his heart before the Lord and be ready and willing to hear whatever the Lord has to say to him? I can't tell you how many other stories I've heard along the ways in my travels. And I haven't traveled all over the world or anything like that. This has mostly been within the Carolinas and some neighboring cities and states. But I've met a lot of people around here, guys, and I have heard story after story after story about people who wanted to do something so much with their life, but the Lord never opened that door. But here, 10, 15, 20 years later, they are doing something that they never imagined they would be doing, but it is great, and they love it, and they are so glad they didn't ever succeed at what they were trying to do at 17 years old. This is good news. This is great news. And what if God is saying to this basketball player, you have steady hands. Your steady hands have gifted you in a way to ball handle all these years and to put up all those threes. But you know what? Now in this next season of your life, I want you to take these steady hands and I want you to become a doctor, and I want you to save lives in the OR. Do you know how hard it is to find doctors with steady hands? Do you know that there are people that can go to med school and get all the way through med school, but they're never, ever going to be able to operate because they have too many tremors in their hands? Natural tremors. I have tremors in my hands. It's rare to find a doctor who does not have tremor, who can successfully execute surgery and go into the finest parts of the human body and sustain the life that's within them. It's a God-given talent. And what if that's what the Lord wants for this young man? And you might say, well, then what did he spend all these years playing basketball for? Well, what if the Lord had him playing basketball all these years to keep him off the streets? to keep his head straight? What if the Lord had him playing basketball because it gave him and his dad a lot of great memories together? All those days out, on the driveway practicing, and his dad was rooting for him and cheering for him there at every game, and now he's going to grow up and he's going to have his kid, and he's going to be doing the same thing with him and recalling all these wonderful, fond memories he had. What if that's the season? God gave him a lot of blessings through that, but what if this is a new season? I think to understand what worship is supposed to do and what worship is supposed to change, because worship does change things. We're getting into the good stuff now. The hard part's over. We've done the surgery. Now we're going to heal. We're going to give you the Vicodin, and it's going to feel great. I think before we try to think about what worship does, we need to know what is worship. What is worship? And the Bible tells us that we worship basically in two different ways. First of all, we've all heard the scripture, worship in spirit and in truth. But our forms of worship, as we said earlier, is with our lips, with our praise, the fruit of our lips, as it says in Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16. 16 goes on to talk about indeed. And it actually says, be good to do good and share with other people, kind of as a sacrifice of share what you have with other people. And when you share what you have with people, you're taking something away. You're stripping something from yourself to give to somebody else. So worship with the fruit of your lips. Give praise to God, sing his praises, glorify his name, magnify him. He is a good God, and he is worthy to be praised. Even if I don't have more than 1 hour left of my life, and I drive out of here on the way home and get hit by a transfer trailer truck on the way home and die, God deserves here in this moment every last bit of my praise. And with our acts of service, I think about how Romans 12:1 tells us to live as living sacrifices. Living sacrifices. And what does this do? What does this do when we really worship? Well, it restores joy to the broken. I think about this person that I've met along the way who was so broken in their infirmity, was so troubled by it, but now they are just completely full of peace and they really have joy. Even though they've still got this in their life, it has not been able to steal their joy. That's power. That is the gospel. That is a faith in Jesus Christ, the living King. What does worship do? It strengthens us when we are weak. I think about Philippians 4:13. We all love to say it. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And the interesting thing about that is here in the modern American cultural Christianity church, we have turned that into some big statement that encompasses a lot of things it was never meant to encompass. We say, hey, you want to be a college basketball player? Guess what? You can do all things through Christ who strengthens you. Yep, boy, and that's not what it's saying. Actually, if you read the whole Philippians chapter 4, you'll find out that right before, leading up to that, Paul was talking about a lot of the adverse situations he has been in. He says, I've had a lot and I've had a little. I've had food and I've been hungry. I've been in prison, in chains. I've been a free man. He's been in a lot of really difficult situations that the Lord's taken us through. But he's saying, even in the worst of those moments, I draw my strength from Christ. It's Christ who strengthens me. I'm not bound by my circumstances and my situation. I find my strength in Jesus Christ alone. I don't find my joy in personal satisfaction. I don't find my joy in temporary material things or temporary material position among men. I draw everything from Jesus Christ. Hallelujah. Paul figured out something that a lot of us still to this day have not figured out. It draws out our thankfulness to God. It draws out our thankfulness to God, and it changes our perspective and fashions our heart to be more like God's. Isn't that what the Lord wants anyway? Isn't that what he wants? To be ye therefore imitators of Christ, and to conform to his likeness and to his image. The two greatest commandments: love God, love others. That's what God's heart is. That's what God's heart is. Listen, God cares very deeply for all of us. And I'm brought this message today because, for me to leading into and this is my final words here. I know I'm kind of running a little over on the time, but bringing it in, drawing it in to where I tell you how worship has changed my life. I think it's first very important to understand that Jesus made the greatest example of what true worship is, and how the focus is truly God and his will. When he said in the garden, he asked the Lord 3 different times on 3 different occasions, Lord, if there's any other way, please. I don't want to do this, Lord. If there's any other way, if there's something else that can be done in place, God, maybe, please. If you can pass this cup from me. He asked him 3 different times. 3 different times. I think about this so much in all the situations in my life when things don't seem to be going my way, and even when I'm worshiping and loving on God as much as I know how to. This is going to be an encouragement for you, but he said 3 different times, and he was so stressed out about it, the man was sweating blood. Now, I've been in some stressful situations in my life, but I don't think I've ever been to the point or have known anybody who's ever been to the point to where blood was seeping out of their sweat pores. This was intense for Jesus Christ, for the Son of the living God. And he asked them 3 times to do something else. Please, can we do something else here? But you know what? At the end, he always said, nevertheless, not my will, your will be done, Lord. The way that we think nowadays, we think that God would never want us to go under any kind of a bodily stress, or that he would ever want us to, God forbid us have to give up something, But God was asking his son to die. To give up everything. To actually take on sin, and then God was going to turn away from him. This was a brutal, brutal concept to Jesus Christ, who had actually never, ever been without the face of God upon him. He left heaven in all of its glory. He came to live and die as a man. In those last final moments, he pleaded with God, if there's another way. He asked, and he said, if. A lot of times we say, oh, don't say if you doubt. If you doubt, if you have an inkling of doubt, then that just shows you have a lack of faith. But Jesus Christ, the one who gave me the faith that I had, said, if there's another way, God. But he said, nevertheless, thy will be done. And the Lord said, yes, son, my will is for you to go and get your whole body completely shredded and torn up, and it's not going to feel good, but that's my will. And then you know what? I'm going to raise you. And thank God that Jesus, in his time of worship with the Lord, his worship and his praising and his prayer time with the Lord in the garden, thank God that he was able to see past himself and his own wants and desires and hear from the Lord. And how about that sacrifice, that act, that self-sacrifice of worship? When you're doing a service for somebody else, when you're sacrificing yourself for somebody else. And how about Jesus climbing up on that cross? We didn't take his life. We did not take it from him. He's a God. He could have come down any second he wanted to. Don't ever be deceived saying we took his life. He gave it. He gave it in a sacrifice of worship. In the greatest sacrifice of worship of all time, not only did he spill it out of the fruits of his lips to the Father, but he heard from the Father, and he took action, and he did the greatest thing ever. And guess what? His act of worship changed everything. I am so glad he listened to the Lord and his instruction, even though it wasn't going to feel good. And so you want to know how worship changed my life? That's how worship changed my life. the all-time demonstration of worship, changed my life. I was a mess. Some of you know my story, many of you don't, but talking about taking showers at the YMCA. There were times I was homeless, taking showers at the YMCA. I identified so much with that. Being involved with drugs and running the streets and just, I mean, I was a nut. I was a punk. I was a lot of things. And all I know is that what Jesus did for me on the cross and that act of worship completely flipped my world upside down, and I've never been the same ever since. So yes, if that's what everything means, in complete submission to the will of God for my life, then yes, absolutely. Worship changes everything. Thank you.